They say the church in Black Hollow was built on holy ground. But the first time I saw it, nothing about that place felt holy. It sat alone on a windswept hill, miles from the nearest village, its wooden steeple tilted slightly as though the earth beneath it were trying to swallow it whole. The paint had long since peeled to gray splinters. Its bell, black with rust, hung silent above the empty field. I came because of a story, an old one, the kind that lives longer than the people who tell it. My grandmother used to whisper it when the candles burned low. She said there was a well beneath the church, a pit dug so deep it touched the edge of the abyss. Long ago, the villagers lowered their dead into it when the ground was too frozen for graves. But something down there refused to stay quiet. Children disappeared. Livestock were found bloodless in the fields. And on certain moonless nights, you could hear a dripping sound from the church floor, as if the stones themselves were bleeding. The village sealed the well, she said, and built the church to hold it shut. The priest declared it holy. But holiness is only a word. I didn't believe her. Not completely, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. When she died last winter, I inherited her journal. Tucked between brittle pages of recipes and weather notes was a single entry dated October 17, 1953. The whisper came again tonight. It knows my name. Below it, a rough charcoal sketch of the church. And at the center of the nave, a black circle. That was enough to drag me across 2 states to this forgotten hill. The road ended in a tangle of leafless trees. From there I walked. Cold air smelled of damp earth and iron. With every step, silence thickened, like cotton stuffed into my ears. Even my own breathing seemed muted, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The church revealed itself slowly through the fog, its crooked steeple rising like a finger pointing at a sky that didn't want to look back. The front doors stood slightly open, not wide enough to invite, but not closed enough to refuse. Inside, the air was colder than the wind outside. Dust floated in slow spirals, catching thin shafts of dying daylight that leaked through cracked, stained glass. The pews were warped with rot. The altar leaned forward, its cross missing. But the floor was perfect. Smooth stone, darker than the wood around it, arranged in a circle at the center of the nave. When I stepped closer, the silence deepened. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a pressure, a listening. I knelt and touched the stone. It was damp, not with water, but something thicker, like the skin of a cold animal. My fingers came away black. A faint smell rose with the moisture. Rust, salt, and something sweet beneath it. Like rotting fruit. That's when I heard it. A single drop. Plink. Somewhere beneath the stone. I froze. Another drop. Plink. The sound came from below, deep and deliberate, as if a cavern beneath the church exhaled in time with my heartbeat. Each drip echoed longer than it should have, fading into a depth my mind refused to measure. I pressed my ear to the stone. For a breathless moment, there was only silence. Then, a whisper, too faint to understand, too close to ignore. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The sound stopped. The air relaxed. The church returned to its quiet decay. But something had changed. A thin crack now split the center of the stone circle. I swear it hadn't been there when I arrived. And from that crack rose the smell of wet earth. And something older than soil. Outside, night had fallen. The moon hid behind thick clouds, leaving the hill in a gray that felt heavier than darkness. As I descended the path back to the road, the wind carried a faint, rhythmic sound behind me. Plink, plink, plink. Each drop perfectly spaced. Each drop a step closer. I didn't turn around. I barely slept that night. The motel room I'd rented in the next town oversmelled faintly of damp carpet and bleach. The heater rattled like dry bones. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. That slow, deliberate plink echoing beneath the church floor. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of a stairwell spiraling downward, carved into black stone. A single candle burned far below, and each step I took rang out like a drop of water hitting an empty bucket. I woke with my ears ringing, the sound of dripping still hanging in the room long after consciousness returned. By morning, a gray drizzle coated the world in cold shine. I drove back to Black Hollow, following roads that seemed narrower than yesterday, as if the landscape itself was pulling inward. The church appeared again through the fog, leaning, listening. I parked at the base of the hill and started up the path. My boots sank into mud. each step releasing the smell of wet earth and old iron. Crows circled overhead in perfect, silent loops. Not a single caw. Halfway up, I saw something I'd missed before. A small stone marker half buried in the weeds. Its surface was worn smooth by decades of rain, but a single word remained etched deep enough to survive time. Remember. The letters were carved too carefully to be random, their edges sharp despite the erosion. Remember what? Or who? The question followed me as I reached the church door. Inside, the air was colder than yesterday, so cold that my breath lingered in front of me like smoke. The circle of stone waited in the center of the nave, the thin crack across its surface now wider. Moisture glistened along its edges, as though something beneath had been pressing upward during the night. I crouched near the crack and held my phone flashlight over it. The beam disappeared into blackness almost immediately, swallowed by a depth that seemed impossible for a church floor. And then I heard it again. Plink, plink. Only this time, there was a third sound between the drops. A soft scrape, like fingernails dragging across stone. My grandmother's journal flashed in my mind. Her trembling handwriting. It knows my name. I whispered my own name, barely audible even to myself. The scrape stopped. Then, slowly, a new sound rose from below. A low, wet sigh, like air escaping from a deep cavern. The circle of stone vibrated beneath my knees. I staggered back, my flashlight flickering. Behind me, wood creaked. I spun around, expecting the door to swing open, but the church remained empty. Still, the sound continued. A slow, deliberate step on rotten floorboards. Another, and another, each one coming closer from the far end of the nave. I aimed the flashlight into the shadows. Only pews, only dust. But as the light moved, the sound matched it, always staying just beyond the beam. I retreated toward the entrance, every muscle screaming to run. My hand closed around the door handle and stopped. The handle was warm, too warm for a building this cold. Through the wood came a faint vibration, like someone humming on the other side. A low, tuneless melody that felt older than language. I yanked the door open. Nothing, only the gray drizzle outside. The humming stopped the moment the door swung wide. I stepped out into the mist, heart pounding. The hilltop field stretched empty around me, but the silence wasn't relief. It was pressure, a pause before the next breath. As I turned to lock the door, something on the church wall caught my eye. A small iron plate nailed beside the frame, half hidden under peeling paint. I scraped away the flakes until the engraving showed. It read, "Sealed in faith. Do not open." My stomach tightened. Whatever the villagers had buried beneath this church, they hadn't trusted wood and stone alone. They'd trusted fear. Rain began to fall harder, sharp and cold. I backed away from the church, but halfway down the path, the ground trembled. A faint shiver at first, then a low groan as though something enormous was shifting beneath the hill. The crows broke their silence at last, exploding into frantic caws that tore through the fog. They scattered in all directions, black flecks against the gray. Behind me came a sound that wasn't thunder, a deep, resonant knock. From beneath the church floor, 3 slow, deliberate strikes. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't run. I couldn't. The sound rooted me where I stood, vibrating through my bones like a second heartbeat. It wasn't asking to be heard. It was promising. And then, as suddenly as it began, the hill fell silent again. Only the drizzle remained, whispering against dead grass. I forced myself to move, each step heavier than the last, until the church disappeared behind the trees. But the echo of those 3 knocks followed me all the way to the car, pulsing inside my skull long after the sound itself was gone. I spent the rest of that day buried in the local library, trying to chase the story backward through time. The librarian, a pale woman with tired eyes, looked surprised when I asked for records of Black Hollow Church. Most of those files were sealed, she said, lowering her voice. But we do have the parish ledger. Old sermons, birth and death records, that sort of thing. She slid a cracked leather book across the counter, its spine smelling of damp paper and forgotten prayers. The ledger dated back to the 1800s. The early pages were neat, lists of baptisms, weddings, Sunday donations. Then, around 1874, the handwriting changed. Jagged, rushed, as though whoever held the pen had been writing while something whispered in their ear. The first strange entry read, "The well grows restless. Children dream of water. The priest hears their names. The next page was worse. Sealed beneath stone. Faith is a lid, but the lid sweats. After that, the handwriting dissolved into frantic scrawls. Words smeared by tears or damp. Whole sentences reduced to a single phrase repeated again and again. Remember the depth. My grandmother's warning echoed in my mind. It knows my name. And now, this town's ancestors were whispering the same command across a century. Remember, I left the library with the ledger's words burning in my head. The drizzle had thickened into steady rain. Streets glistened like wet slate. In the diner across the square, a few locals watched me through fogged windows as I passed. Their gazes weren't curious. They were measuring. Halfway to the motel, a man stepped from a narrow alley. A gaunt figure in a soaked wool coat, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of a dripping hat. He blocked my path without a word. "You went up there." His voice rasped like gravel. It wasn't a question. I tried to sidestep him, but he moved with me. "You touched the stone?" Again, not a question. Rain drummed on the sidewalk between us. "How do you?" I started. "Don't listen to it," he cut in. "It feeds on names. Once it learns yours, it follows." His eyes glinted with something between fear and recognition. "Your grandmother ever tell you that?" The air around us tightened. I felt the sudden, sharp chill of being watched, though the street was empty. "How do you know my grandmother?" I asked. He leaned closer, rainwater streaking down his hollow cheeks. "Because it knew hers, too." Then he turned and disappeared back into the alley, leaving only the sound of dripping water echoing off brick. That night, I tried to leave town. I threw my bag into the car and started toward the highway. But every road out was shrouded in a mist so dense my headlights barely cut through it. Street signs blurred. Intersections looped back onto themselves. No matter which turn I took, I ended up back in the town square. The church steeple loomed faintly in the distance, its crooked spire a compass needle that always pointed me home. Exhausted and shaken, I returned to the motel. The hallway lights flickered in an almost rhythmic pattern. On off, mimicking the slow drip I'd heard beneath the church floor. Inside my room, damp air clung to the wallpaper. I set my bag on the bed and froze. The leather ledger from the library lay open on the nightstand. I hadn't taken it. Its pages flipped slowly on their own, as though a faint breeze passed through a room with no windows open. The final page settled flat, revealing fresh black ink bleeding across paper that should have been dry for decades. My name, written 3 times. I snapped the book shut and shoved it across the room. It landed with a heavy thud, and the dripping sound stopped. For the first time all day, silence filled the space. But silence in Black Hollow was never empty. It waited. In that silence came a faint vibration beneath the floor. Not an earthquake, not plumbing, a heartbeat. I left the motel and drove, any direction, it didn't matter. Rain slicked the streets into mirrors. Every turn brought me closer to the hill. The church's silhouette rose again through the fog, its black steeple spearing the night. I parked at the base of the path, engine idling like a nervous animal. The crack in the stone would be wider now. I felt it, the way you feel a storm pressing against the sky. Something beneath that floor wanted me back, and it had my name. I woke up to the sound of bells. Not the bright, jubilant bells I remembered from Sunday mornings as a child, but a single, hollow toll that echoed through the valley like a bruise spreading through quiet air. My eyes snapped open to blackness, and for a brief, half-dreaming moment I thought I was still inside the church, until the scent of damp wood and wet moss brought me back. I was in the guest room of the old inn, where I'd collapsed after my frantic flight. The lamp I'd left burning had guttered out hours ago. Only the thin moonlight leaking through warped shutters gave shape to the room. The toll came again. Dome. A pause long enough to imagine the earth itself holding its breath. Dome. It was the church bell. It hadn't rung in decades. Every instinct screamed to stay where I was, to pull the blankets over my head and pretend the sound belonged to some harmless night creature. But the bell called like a question I couldn't refuse. By the third toll, I was already on my feet, pulling on my damp coat, my breath frosting in the cold. Outside, the village lay drowned in a thin, silvery fog. Rooflines slouched like weary shoulders. The cobblestones beneath my boots were slick with dew and something darker, streaks that glistened faintly, like water but thicker, almost oily. Each bell strike thudded through the mist, vibrating in my ribs. I told myself I was only going to the church to look, just to prove that nothing, no one, could be ringing it. Maybe a loose rope, a trick of the wind. Maybe the bell had finally collapsed and the sound was just stone echoing against stone. Any explanation was better than the one my grandmother used to whisper, "When the well calls, someone must answer." The fog thickened as I climbed the crooked path up the hill. My flashlight's beam felt weaker than before, swallowed by the white gloom. Halfway up, I heard another sound beneath the bell's slow pulse, a wet, rhythmic drip, like water striking metal far underground. Each step made it louder. The church emerged from the mist as if it had been waiting. Its steeple tilted against the moonlight, broken cross jutting like a jagged tooth. The wooden door hung slightly ajar, though I remembered slamming it shut when I escaped last night. The bell tolled again, louder now. Dong! The door creaked wider with the vibration, inviting me in. The nave smelled of mildew and burnt wax. My flashlight swept across pews that seemed subtly rearranged, as if someone had dragged them into a tighter formation while I slept. At the far end, the trapdoor in the floor gaped like a black pupil, wide open. A thin rope ladder dangled into the darkness below. I froze. Last night, that door had been sealed with rusted iron. I checked it myself. The bell overhead gave a final, shuddering strike, then fell silent. The drip below filled the void, echoing up from the pit. My heart hammered in time with it. Drip, drip, drip. Something deep inside me, a mix of dread and longing, pulled toward the opening. I lowered myself to the edge. The air that rose from the hole was impossibly cold, carrying the mineral scent of ancient stone and something sweeter, almost floral, like lilies left too long in stagnant water. I tested the rope ladder. It held, though the wood was slick beneath my gloves. My flashlight beam disappeared into a vertical tunnel of carved stone. I could not see the bottom. A rational voice whispered that I should run, call for help, anything. But another voice, softer, strangely familiar, rose from the depths. It didn't speak words, only a low hum, like the vibration of the bell transformed into music. I descended. Each rung groaned under my weight. The darkness thickened, swallowing the light until it felt like I was sinking through liquid night. Water droplets struck my shoulders and hair, each one icy enough to sting. After what felt like minutes, my boots found solid ground. The chamber at the bottom was wider than I'd imagined, a perfect circle of black stone slick with moisture. Veins of pale quartz ran through the walls, glowing faintly as if lit from within. In the center yawned the well itself, a ring of ancient masonry surrounding a pit so dark it seemed to drink the beam of my flashlight. The drip I'd heard came from a single stalactite above, its water striking the stone rim with clock-like precision. But when I leaned closer, I realized the sound wasn't echoing outward. It was echoing upward, as though the well were answering back. I knelt, heart hammering, and peered into the void. Something moved far below, not a shape, but a ripple of darkness sliding against itself, like ink stirring in a jar. The air above it pulsed in slow waves, carrying faint whispers that almost formed words. Come back. Remember. Home. The voices were not entirely unfamiliar. My grandmother's lullaby. My father's laugh, long dead. A childhood friend whose name I hadn't spoken in years. They braided together into a single, impossible chorus. My knees trembled. I gripped the stone rim until my knuckles burned. The whispers grew louder, urgent yet tender. Just one step. The water is warm. No more loneliness. I leaned forward despite myself. The stone beneath my palms felt soft, almost pliant, like damp clay. A warmth rose from the well now, the scent of lilies sharper, intoxicating. I imagined letting go, feeling the air rush past, the voices closing around me like a long-awaited embrace. A sudden crash above snapped me back. The rope ladder swayed violently, as if someone, or something, had gripped it from above. Dust rained down in choking clouds. I looked up but saw only darkness where the entrance had been. Then, faint but clear, a voice I knew too well drifted down. It was my own, calling my name. The sound froze me more than any inhuman whisper. My voice, but deeper, wetter, as though it had traveled through water for miles. Come back, it said. It's better here. I staggered back from the rim, flashlight flickering. The stone floor pulsed under my feet, softening like flesh. The quartz veins brightened until the walls themselves glowed a pale, sickly green. The well answered again, this time with a low, resonant hum that matched the bell's final toll. My own voice echoed from the depths, layered and endless. I turned and grabbed the ladder, climbing with frantic speed. The rungs were slick, almost writhing, but I didn't dare stop. The whispers rose behind me, my voice mixing with the others, calling promises I refused to hear. Halfway up, a wet chill brushed my ankle, a touch like a cold hand, gentle but deliberate. I kicked free and climbed harder, lungs burning. At last, I burst through the trapdoor into the nave. The church was silent, the fog outside pressing against the cracked windows like a living thing. The bell rope swayed gently though no wind stirred. I slammed the trapdoor shut and staggered backward until my spine hit the far wall. My own breathing filled the cavernous space. Then, faintly, beneath the silence, I heard it. Drip, drip, drip. The sound of the well. But this time, it was coming from inside my chest. The path up the hill looked different the next night, like something had shifted in the landscape while I was gone. The wet grass felt slick beneath my boots, though no rain had fallen all evening. Every step released a faint, cold scent of iron, as if the soil itself bled. The church loomed ahead, a black silhouette against a moonless sky. Its crooked steeple pointed toward a heaven that seemed to have forgotten this place. The door opened before I touched it. No creak, no gust of wind. It simply drifted inward, exposing the shadowed nave like a mouth waiting to swallow. Inside, the air pressed against my chest. It was warmer than the night air outside, but the warmth was wrong, like breath rising from something deep underground. My flashlight beam slid across pews that hadn't been used in years. The crucifix above the altar hung crooked, its wood warped by time. But it wasn't the crucifix that held my attention. It was the floor. The crack in the stone had widened since my last visit. No longer a hairline fracture, now a jagged seam stretching almost the width of the altar. Faint vapor leaked upward, curling like smoke from a hidden fire. The sound came next. Not dripping this time. Something deeper. A slow, deliberate pulse, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. I stepped closer, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The vibration beneath my feet was unmistakable, steady, patient, alive. A sudden memory surfaced, the gaunt man from the alley, his warning about names. It feeds on names. As if responding to the thought, a low whisper floated upward from the crack. Not words, just the cadence of language, the rhythm of someone practicing speech. I crouched to look into the gap. Darkness, but not empty darkness. It had texture, a shifting depth that made my eyes ache to follow. Shapes moved far below, like ripples on black water, though there was no light to reveal them. The whisper grew clearer. Remember, it was almost a sigh, drawn out and wet. Then another sound slid beneath it, one I recognized immediately. My own name. I jerked back, nearly dropping the flashlight. Its beam wavered across the altar and landed on something I hadn't noticed before. A square outline in the stone, faint but deliberate, like the lid of a trapdoor. The ledger's words burned in my mind. Sealed beneath stone. Faith is a lid, but the lid sweats. The seam in the floor was not just a crack. It was a boundary. The whisper continued, soft but insistent, testing the shape of my name like a tongue tasting a wound. I pressed my palms against the stone lid. Warm. Too warm. The instant my skin touched it, a flash of sensation surged through me. Not pain, but a memory that wasn't mine. Children gathered at night, chanting in voices too young to understand the words. The priest standing behind them, eyes hollow, hands bleeding from the weight of the stone he had just sealed. Then, silence. The memory snapped away, leaving me gasping. I staggered back, heart hammering. The church seemed to lean inward, its walls breathing with the same rhythm as the pulse below. A sudden crash echoed from the vestibule. The front door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed the nave as my flashlight flickered and died. The whisper became a chorus. Not one voice now, but many, overlapping, rising, weaving together into a sound that was almost a hymn. Names tangled with names, some old and strange, some frighteningly familiar. Through the darkness, a faint glow began to seep from the crack in the floor. Not white, not yellow, something deeper, like the color of drowned light. The stone beneath me shuddered, and then I heard it. Not the chorus, not the echoes, but a single clear voice breaking through them all. My grandmother. Leave it sealed, she whispered. Don't give it what it wants. The church quaked. Dust rained from the rafters. The trapdoor lid shifted with a grinding moan. My grandmother's voice wavered, almost drowned by the rising chorus. It only takes a name. Yours. Mine. Anyone who listens too long. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound burrowed inward like water through stone. Something beneath the floor pressed upward, testing the strength of the seal. The stone groaned like an old tooth in a rotten jaw. Through the glow, I saw a movement again, something rising through the well's impossible depth. Not a figure, not an animal, a shape that belonged only to the word below. The chorus sharpened. One name rang louder than all the others. Mine, spoken in my grandmother's voice. The ground lurched. The stone lid cracked an inch upward. Heat burst through the gap, carrying a stench of wet earth and ancient breath. Instinct took over. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a pew. The flashlight flared once, a desperate flicker, and in that instant I saw the far wall of the church, and the shadow of something that should not have been there. Tall, rooted, reaching. Then the light died again. The whisper fell silent. Only the heartbeat remained, steady as ever, echoing up from the well. I fled into the night. I ran until the church was nothing more than a crooked shadow swallowed by fog. The road back to town seemed longer than before. Each step stretched, each breath dragged. When I finally reached the square, the street lamps hummed like insects. The rain had stopped, but everything dripped as if the air itself was sweating. The motel's neon sign flickered in frantic Morse code. Inside, the lobby was empty. The clerk who had sat behind the desk every night was gone. Only a single brass key rested on the counter. Room 3, my room. The key was damp. I hesitated before unlocking the door. The silence inside pressed against me like a held breath. The ledger I'd thrown earlier lay open on the nightstand, its pages rippling as though something beneath them breathed. Fresh ink bled across the final page. The lid is weak. My hands trembled. This book belonged to the church, yet it followed me here. It wanted me to read. It wanted me to believe. I snapped it shut and shoved it into the drawer. The wood rattled, though I hadn't slammed it. That's when I heard the knock. 3 slow raps against the door. Measured. Polite. I stepped back. Who is it? My voice barely carried. No answer. The knob turned, though I hadn't touched it. Through the crack between door and frame, a single whisper slid into the room. Not a word, just the sound of someone tasting the shape of my name. I pressed my palm against the door, heart hammering. The whisper came again, clearer now, wearing my grandmother's voice. Don't let it open. The knob stopped turning. The silence that followed was worse than the knock. Sleep was impossible. I left before dawn, hoping daylight would loosen the town's grip. But when I reached the highway, thick fog rose from the fields and swallowed the asphalt. The same looping roads returned, guiding me back to the square no matter which turn I took. The church steeple pierced the fog like a black nail. It wasn't just drawing me back. It was keeping me. Desperation drove me to the town archives in the courthouse basement. Dust-choked boxes lined the shelves, labeled with fading dates. I searched until my fingers ached. Finally, I found a brittle packet marked 1874, Parish Affairs. Inside were letters. Ink faded to the color of old bruises. One, written in a shaking hand, read, "Father Bell has sealed the well beneath the altar. The children's dreams have grown too loud. The water speaks their names in the night. If the stone ever shifts, the abyss will open again, and the drowned voices will walk among us." Another letter bore only 3 words. "Pray the lid holds." I dropped the papers and staggered back. The ledger's frantic scrawl, the widening crack, the chorus of names, it all pointed to the same truth. The church wasn't a house of God. It was a lid, a seal, and something beneath it was waking. A low vibration shuddered through the courthouse floor. It was faint at first, like the rumble of a passing truck. But there were no trucks at this hour. The sound rose, spreading through the shelves like a ripple through dark water. From somewhere deep in the stacks came a wet, rhythmic drip. Drip. Pause. Drip. Then a voice. Soft, familiar. My grandmother. "If you break the seal, you break the town." The vibration grew into a slow heartbeat. The shelves trembled. Dust sifted down in gray curtains. I fled, letters still clutched in my shaking hand. Back outside, The fog had thickened to a wall of pale cloth. The square was empty, yet the air carried the faint rustle of many people breathing at once. From the church hill came a dull boom, like stone cracking. I turned toward the sound. The steeple was barely visible, but faint light pulsed within the fog. A slow, rhythmic glow, beating in time with the vibration beneath my feet. The seal was failing. I drove my car straight toward the hill, the road twisting like a serpent under the fog. Every instinct screamed to leave, but leaving was impossible. If the stone broke completely, there would be no way. As I neared the church, the fog thinned enough to reveal shapes along the path. Figures, dozens of them. They stood motionless, heads bowed, faces hidden by dripping hoods. Villagers, waiting. As I passed, none of them moved, but I heard the whisper travel through them like a shared breath. My name, carried from mouth to mouth, soft as falling ash. The church door stood open, spilling a faint, sickly glow. Inside, the heartbeat thundered. Stone groaned like a mountain splitting. The lid was nearly free. I tightened my grip on the letters, my grandmother's warning burning in my ears. Pray the lid holds. But prayer felt useless here. The abyss didn't need faith. It needed only a name. The church door yawned wider as I approached, as though the building itself were inhaling. The villagers flanking the path did not stir. Their bowed heads and dripping hoods formed a corridor of silence that swallowed every sound except the heartbeat pulsing from the hill. Each step I took seemed to sync with that rhythm until my own heart stumbled into its pace. Inside, the nave glowed with a faint, unnatural light seeping from the widening crack in the floor. The once crooked crucifix now hung perfectly straight, its shadow stretching across the pews like a drawn blade. The stone lid shuddered with each beat. I stepped closer, clutching the letters from the archive. The ink bled into my damp fingers as if the words themselves were sweating. Pray the lid holds. Another tremor rolled through the floor. The crack split a little more. Heat surged upward, humid and metallic, carrying the unmistakable scent of blood and wet earth. The whispers began again, hundreds of voices, weaving in and out of one another until they formed a single terrible harmony. Children's laughter threaded through the chant like a knife wrapped in silk. Then came a voice so familiar it cut through the noise. My grandmother. Do not give it what it wants. I dropped to my knees beside the crack. The glow within it pulsed like the heart of some buried creature. Shapes writhed far below, shadows that swam against the darkness like fish beneath black ice. When they brushed the underside of the stone, the heartbeat quickened. The villagers entered the church behind me, their steps in perfect rhythm with the pulse. They formed a wide circle around the altar, heads still bowed. Not one of them looked at me. Their whispers joined the chorus. My name. Again and again. Each repetition scraped against my skull, erasing every thought that wasn't down. The stone lid groaned and lifted another inch. From the gap burst a column of warm vapor, thick with the smell of rain-soaked graves. Within the fog, something shifted, a suggestion of limbs, or maybe roots, groping blindly toward the surface. The letters slipped from my grasp and skittered across the floor, their faded warnings lost beneath the villagers' chant. Give it a name. The command threaded through the voices like a blade. Give it your name. My throat tightened. My mouth moved despite myself. The first syllable trembled on my tongue. I clenched my jaw until it ached. No. My voice cracked against the church's breathing walls. You can't have it. The chorus faltered for a heartbeat, then swelled, louder than before. The villagers raised their heads in unison. Their eyes glowed with the same drowned light that seeped from the crack. One step at a time, they moved toward me, their whispers sharpening into a single, undeniable demand. Speak. The stone lid lurched upward, widening the gap to a hand's breadth. Heat rolled out in choking waves. I could almost feel it. The abyss straining upward, eager to wear my name like a key. A sudden gust of icy wind swept through the church, rattling the rotten rafters. The villagers froze. For a brief, fragile moment, the chorus faltered. Through the roar of blood in my ears, I heard another voice, thin but unmistakable. My grandmother again, carried on the wind. Names can bind or break. Give it a false one. A false name. My mind raced. Any name. A barrier of sound. The villagers stepped closer, their glowing eyes reflecting the abyssal light. Speak, they demanded. I opened my mouth and forced a name from my throat, a name that was not my own. Michael. The church shuddered. The reaction was instant. The glow dimmed to a flicker. The villagers staggered as if struck. The stone lid slammed downward with a thunderous crack, sealing the gap once more. The chorus collapsed into a single anguished wail that cut off mid-breath. Silence flooded the nave like cold water. The villagers crumpled to the floor, motionless. Only the faint drip of water remained. I stood trembling, heart still hammering in the rhythm of the well. The letters lay scattered around me, their ink smearing into dark, unreadable stains. The stone lid sat flush again, but a thin thread of steam curled upward from its seam. A reminder that the abyss was not gone, only waiting. I turned toward the door. The villagers still lay collapsed, but as I passed, their chests rose and fell in slow, even breaths. Sleep, not death. Outside, the fog had begun to thin. For the first time in days, I saw the faint glow of morning on the horizon. But the heartbeat remained. Quieter now, hidden beneath the soil, but steady, patient. It knew that names are only masks, and it would wait for mine. The morning sun never reached the heart of the village. It sat like a pale coin in a sky still heavy with mist, its weak light barely scraping the moss-covered stones. I walked the path alone, the letters clutched tight in my fist. Each step away from the church should have felt like release, but my body remained wound-tight, every nerve still listening for a heartbeat that was no longer there. The villagers stirred slowly from their unnatural sleep. One by one, they emerged from doorways and crooked alleys, faces blank but eyes wet as if they had been crying in their dreams. None of them spoke. They simply watched as I passed, their silence a language older than words. When I reached the edge of the village, the air tasted different. Damp earth, salt, and a faint trace of iron. I turned for one last look. The church sat on its hill, roof sagging like the back of a dying animal. But the stone lid of the well remained sealed. From this distance, I could almost pretend the night before had been nothing more than a fevered dream. Almost. The archive letters trembled in my hand. The ink had bled into unreadable swirls. But one sentence remained intact, its faded red letters shining like fresh blood. The well sleeps only when it is named. Beneath those words, a smaller line I hadn't noticed before surfaced as the morning light caught the page. But a false name is a promise it will one day collect. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of dripping water. No heartbeat. Not yet. But the sound settled in the hollows of my skull. A rhythm waiting for the right silence to grow. I thought of the name I had given, Michael, and felt a sharp pang of guilt for the stranger whose identity I had borrowed. If names were doors, had I simply shifted the lock to another soul? My grandmother's warning returned, soft as breath. Names can bind or break. I had bound it for now, but every binding is a kind of invitation. Nightfall came early as I made my way home. Even miles from the village, I felt the church's shadow stretch behind me, a tether of stone and darkness. At a roadside inn, I paused to wash the dirt from my hands. The water in the basin trembled without a breeze. For a moment, it seemed to pulse, a tiny reflection of the well's heartbeat. When I blinked, the ripples smoothed, but the faint scent of wet earth lingered. I whispered the false name under my breath. The water shivered again. That night, I dreamed of the church. The stone lid was whole, but beneath it, something vast and patient shifted in slow circles, its motion matching the rhythm of my own heart. Every beat felt like a question. Who are you really? I woke before dawn. The letters scattered across the floor like fallen feathers. One of them, the one with the red writing, lay face down. On its back, new words had appeared, written in damp streaks of soil. We know you. The ink was still wet. I left the village behind, but the church did not leave me. It waits beneath the soil, its well breathing through the cracks of memory, patient as the dark between heartbeats. Names fade, doors rot, but the abyss beneath the church has all the time in the world.